Kia ora, Dee from Waipa District Libraries. Thanks for joining us. Joining me today is local author Marie-Ann Quin, author of the book Emerald to Pounamu, A Midwife's Odyssey. Marie-Ann, thanks for joining me. You've always had an affinity with mums and babies, and I believe that started from a young age.
Definitely. Apparently for my mum, my first word was baby. And if I ever went missing on the cul-de-sac street that we lived on, I would always be found in the house of a baby.
So career-wise, you wanted to work in this space, but you had to get into nursing initially. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, I can. My mum and dad couldn't afford to pay for my training in Karatani nursing, which I had my sights set on. And at that stage, I didn't even think I was good enough to be a midwife. So the next best thing was to do nursing, and then with the intention of going on to do my midwifery. Always I had a lesser view of my abilities. So I went off nursing at the tender age of 16 to the Waikato from Gisborne, and we had to do 3.5 years training and work right through the different wards, medical, surgical, paediatrics, and I always geared myself and chose the paediatric ward or the maternity ward as my electives.
Now, you've worked with numerous women and children across the Waikato. What has been the most special about the experience, or what particularly stands out for you?
I just think that every mother is really special, and she's just amazing, and the strength that comes from mums is just blows me away all the time. And just my love of babies, it's never waned. Every time I get a baby in my hands, I just want to cuddle it and smell the beautiful smell that babies do have. So to be part of a family or whānau's arrival of a new being in their family was such an honour. And also as a community midwife, I was 4 years plunket nursing before I actually did my midwifery. My children were little, and that was the reasonable hours I could do. So being a plunket nurse was a great transition into midwifery. And when my baby turned 5 and went to school, that was when I was able to do my midwifery. But I think working in the community was the biggest plus, going into people's homes and really being a welcomed guest in their home and honouring them for their choices, for really their individuality, and not going in there guns all blazing thinking that I knew better. Always finding out from the mums, what do you want to do? How do you see this? And let's work together to make it happen. So I did my midwifery in 1990 and just fell in love with it straight away. And there's a lot of challenges in midwifery. It's a very, it can be very challenging in the way that anything could happen, anything can go wrong. And when you're in the community, especially in a remote rural area, and my area went all the way out to Kawhia, all the way over to Cambridge and out to Arahina. So I had some challenging experiences in people's homes, unexpected, unplanned.
When did you first think about putting pen to paper about your experiences?
In 1904, midwives could become registered, and it became a law that midwives must become registered. And so in 2004, we had our 100-year celebration. So I thought I can put a presentation together, and I talked over with a few of the midwives who are putting on the one of the celebrations at the Wintec. It used to be the Waikato Polytech, and I put together a PowerPoint presentation, and I wrote a ballad of midwifery, and really just how those pioneer midwives had to experience doing their job with such limited facilities, really, going into people's homes, often riding on horses to get there, and the research really excited me about the history. I'd never been interested in history before. It was all learning dates and all about wars and things like that, and we had a very boring history teacher. And so I got really excited about history, and then it just developed from there, this ballad of midwifery. And then all of a sudden, with all the research and all the information that I gleaned, I thought, there's a book here.
Yes.
So my thought was the changes in midwifery since the settlers came to New Zealand to the modern day. And I'd lived through or worked through 3 of those major changes. And so looking back and gathering the information and going to libraries and learning how to do interviews, that was, all challenging, but in a really positive way. And I got more and more excited about it, and so that's where it ignited.
Yes. And what was the hardest part about researching the book?
I don't know whether there was any hard part, and I really didn't ever expect to reach my goal, but I'm a person who always finishes a task. So not thinking about how long it was going to take me, but every step of the way was exciting. And when I interviewed a local midwife here who'd worked in the 30s and 40s, and her sister owned a birthing unit, they were private birthing units at the time, to capture her story was just so amazing. And so I wanted to do it perfectly, so I went and did a course on doing interviews at the Alexander Turnbull Library, and I interviewed this woman, Chris Story, and she was 90 at the time, reasonably well, and we talked for 2.5 hours, and I said after that, look, Chris, this has been a long time. I've still got a lot of more questions. How about I come back? No, we're going to finish it now, she says. And she died 2 weeks later.
Oh, wow.
And I had this most beautiful gem of a story that her family had never heard. And so they were able to use it in her eulogy, and just to have that lovely story captured. And I think probably the hardest thing, the question you asked, was the gear we had at the interview course. We were absolutely told we had to use tapes because that's what the library kept in those days. They didn't use digital. It was just starting to come in. No, we have all our archives in tape form, and really the quality was not good. And at the moment I'm transposing some interviews from USBs and the digital recording, and it's so much different. It's been so hard to get all of the words coming from those tapes.
Yes, and I suppose ironically enough, those tapes that were being used are now having to be digitised.
Exactly. But I mean, I did the right thing, and I'm one of those pedantic people who do listen to what I'm being told, and that was great. And I loved going to the Petone Museum and looking at all the archives of the ship's logs of the settlers coming into New Zealand. And what came from that was that my settlers came from Ireland, and then the other side of the family came from Germany. And when I went to the 175th wedding anniversary of the ship coming into Nelson, I had no idea where my settlers were going to come in, and I thought it would be Gisborne, where I came from, and I'd done some research on the Williams family, and they were missionaries, and they settled north of Gisborne, and all of a sudden it had to be Nelson, because I found that 2 of my German ancestors, my great-great-grandmother and my great-grandmother, were both midwives.
Oh,
and
right.
And it was a no-brainer for being where it was going to happen.
Right. So have you been able to include much of your own experience in your book?
Absolutely. It's been part of the deal, really, because as a rural midwife and a remote rural midwife, an independent midwife, I've had a lot of experiences that would have actually been similar to what these midwives who are pioneer midwives would have experienced. And I've got a beautiful story that I share with people when I'm doing my author's talk about an experience I had. And I was just writing my book as I went along and had some spare time, and I really started writing my book. I started researching it 17 years ago, but I started writing my book when I was doing a locum in Timaru, and that was 4 years ago. And I had this experience in a remote, or not in a rural area, where it was an hour and a half to the main hospital, where a very challenging birth happened. And not a word of a lie, I went back when I was writing, and I'd go back a few pages and just get the gist of where I was up to. And I found the story of the challenging birth I had just conducted.
Wow.
In the pages, written down already. And I said to my husband, you can't believe this, but I'm not lying. You have to actually read this to know that this actually has happened already, and I've written it down. It was almost preempting it.
Wow. So the book was launched last month. What's the reception been like so far?
It's been beyond my wildest dreams. So as a rookie author, and having never really written anything and published anything, even articles, other than doing that presentation for the Ballad of Midwifery, I had no idea, but I was tidying up some of my notes because I've just recently retired, and I found a certificate, and I actually done a diploma of creative writing in about 2002, and I hadn't remembered that I'd done that, but I'd obviously been keen to do it. And then I did a course as I was writing the thing, which was an online course with my daughter, and we challenged each other. It was called the 100-day challenge, to finish our manuscript in 100 days. So I just thought, oh yes, I'll maybe sell about 100, but my daughter said, oh, maybe get 300, Mum, printed, then you've got them. And I thought, oh yeah, I'd be lucky to sell 100, but I'll have 200 sitting under my bed. And I've already sold the first 300, which I could never, ever have imagined. But also the reception from other people. There was, through the interview I did with Jessie Mulligan and through people, word of mouth, and, getting out there and doing talks, it's really, a lot of people have come to me from everywhere, and people I don't know, and told me, oh, my mother's a midwife, and my auntie's a midwife, and my grandmother was a midwife, and da-da-da-da-da. And so it hasn't been just that, midwife stories or birth stories have prompted people to be very interested.
Fantastic. Well, congratulations. Marie-Ann Quin, thank you so much for your time. You can pick up a copy of Emerald to Pounamu at Te Awamutu Paper Plus on Marie-Ann's website, or it's also available locally from Te Awamutu Library. Ka kite.